The Germans built a mine that no machine on Earth could detect, but the Americans found every single one anyway, and what happened next would quietly change the way wars were fought forever. November 1944, the Franco-German border is frozen solid, the ground is hard, the air is heavy, and somewhere in that silence, a German combat engineer kneels in the mud staring at something that does not make sense. Just days earlier, he and his unit had constructed one of the most advanced defensive minefields of the war, not ordinary mines, but carefully engineered devices made almost entirely from wood pulp, ceramic tar, and glass materials selected for one purpose: to defeat detection completely. There was almost no metal inside them, nothing that Allied detectors could pick up. No signal, no warning, no trace. The only metallic part, a tiny detonator buried so deep it might as well not exist. And they tested it themselves over and over again, under different soil conditions, different temperatures, different moisture levels, and every single time the result was the same: complete invisibility. By every technical definition, these mines were perfect. They should have been impossible to find without prior knowledge of their exact location, and that was the entire strategy: to remove detection from the battlefield entirely, to create a weapon that could not be countered by better machines. But now, only a few hundred meters away, American engineers are moving through that same field, and they are not using machines, they are not scanning the ground, they are not relying on technology at all. Instead, they are lying flat in the freezing mud, slowly pushing thin steel rods into the earth at shallow angles, inch by inch, carefully feeling for resistance, something unnatural hidden beneath the surface. Their movements are slow, almost primitive compared to the advanced engineering behind the mines, but within hours, they clear a safe path straight through a field that should have been untouchable. Every mine is found, every single one, and the German engineer watching this unfold does not feel anger or defeat, he feels confusion, because everything he believed about the battlefield has just been proven wrong. He writes later that night a single word in his journal: "Unverstanden, incomprehensible," because what he witnessed was not just a failure of a weapon, it was the collapse of an entire way of thinking about war. And to understand how that happened, you have to go back 2 years earlier to a completely different battlefield where the first cracks in that thinking began to appear, not in the snow, but in the desert, where the war against mines truly began. In 1942, North Africa, the war had reached a turning point, and Field Marshal Erwin Rommel faced a problem. His forces were stretched thin, his supplies limited, and his ability to maneuver shrinking, but he understood something that many commanders at the time did not: that mines were not just defensive tools, they were strategic weapons capable of controlling the entire battlefield. So instead of relying purely on movement, he decided to reshape the terrain itself, creating what became known as the Devil's Garden, a massive layered minefield stretching for miles, filled with anti-tank mines, anti-personnel traps, and scattered metal debris, designed specifically to confuse Allied detection systems. Every meter of ground was calculated, forcing the enemy into a simple but brutal reality: you cannot go around, you cannot go over, you must go through, and going through takes time under fire time. Exposed time that costs lives, and for the Allied forces, this became a nightmare, because their existing methods were too slow, too unreliable, and heavily dependent on manual probing and early detection equipment that struggled with interference and false signals. Entire units were slowed down to a crawl, and every delay meant more casualties, more pressure, and less momentum. The situation demanded a solution, and that solution came from an unexpected direction, not from the front lines, but from engineering. A Polish officer named Józef Kosacki developed a portable metal detector capable of identifying buried metallic objects using electromagnetic fields, and for the first time, mine clearance became faster, more efficient, and far less deadly. And during the Battle of El Alamein, these detectors played a crucial role, allowing Allied engineers to cut through the Devil's Garden at nearly twice the previous speed, shifting the balance of the battlefield. From the German perspective, the lesson seemed obvious: the enemy is succeeding because of better technology, so the answer must be to remove what that technology depends on. And what it depends on is metal. Remove the metal, and you remove detection entirely. It was logical, precise, and completely aligned with the way they understood warfare at the time, but it also planted the seed of a mistake that would take years to fully reveal itself. Because while the Germans focused on defeating machines, the Americans began focusing on something else entirely: not just tools, but systems, not just detection, but adaptation, and that difference would quietly grow into one of the most important advantages of the war. By 1944, Germany had pushed its mine technology to its absolute limits: wooden mines, glass mines, and finally, the top mine, a nearly invisible weapon designed specifically to defeat every known detection method. These mines were cheap, easy to produce, and devastatingly effective, not necessarily to destroy, but to disable, to wound, forcing multiple soldiers out of action for every explosion, creating chaos and slowing entire divisions. And for a time, they worked. American engineers stepped into fields that their detectors declared safe only for hidden explosives to tear through their formations, proving once again that technology alone could not guarantee safety. But while this seemed like a victory for German engineering, something else was happening quietly behind the scenes, something far more important than any single weapon. The Americans had been preparing for this moment for years, studying every failure, every missed mine, every unexpected explosion. And instead of relying on a single solution, they built a layered system of response. When detectors worked, they used them. When detectors failed, they adapted, switching immediately to probing, to observation, to experience, training their engineers not to trust any single tool completely, but to expect failure and be ready for it. And this mindset changed everything, because it meant that no matter how advanced the German mines became, no matter how invisible they were, there was always a fallback, a method that did not depend on the same rules. And that is why in fields across France and Germany, American engineers were able to do what seemed impossible, finding mines that their machines could not detect, because they were not relying on machines alone. They were relying on a system that could adapt faster than the enemy could innovate. And that difference was something the German engineers did not anticipate, because they were solving a technological problem, while the Americans had moved beyond that problem entirely. In the final months of the war, this difference became undeniable. Across multiple battlefields, American engineers cleared thousands of mines that should have remained hidden, fields designed to be untouchable, systematically dismantled by men working slowly, patiently on their hands and knees, trusting their training over any machine. And this was not luck, it was not coincidence, it was the result of a system built over years of failure, learning, and constant improvement, where every mistake became knowledge, and every piece of knowledge became part of a larger process that could not easily be broken. And this is why the German engineer, watching his perfect minefield being cleared, could not understand what he was seeing. Because in his mind, the war was still being fought through better weapons, better engineering, better designs, but in reality, the battlefield had already changed. It was no longer about building something the enemy could not detect. It was about building a system that could adapt no matter what the enemy created. And that is a completely different kind of advantage, one that does not disappear when technology changes, one that cannot be countered by simply designing a better weapon. And in the end, that is what decided the outcome, not just of these minefields, but of the war itself. Because when every machine fails, when every advantage disappears, what remains is not the weapon but the system behind it, and the side that learns faster, adapts faster, and improves faster does not just win battles, it shapes them before they even begin. And that is why something as simple as a man with a steel rod in the mud could defeat the most advanced invisible weapon of its time. Because in war, the smartest side is not the one with the best tools, but the one that knows how to keep winning when those tools stop working.